Hello, everybody. Welcome to our Q&A this afternoon, this beautiful Sunday afternoon for our American Transit Double Feature this week. At Maysles, we are currently streaming for free the films No Data Plan and #1 Bus Chronicles, which you can catch at maysles.org. We're here today with the filmmakers Miko Revereza from No Data Plan and Joel Katz and Delmira, excuse me, sorry, I knew this was gonna happen, and Delmira Valladares from #1 Bus Chronicles. So thank you all so much for being here today, and thank you all for joining this Q&A. We over at the Virtual Cinema also have a number of other films coming up this summer, including currently streaming is the new Ella Fitzgerald documentary, Just One of Those Things, which will be available as of June 26th. And we have several other films upcoming later in July and in August. So stay tuned and check us out on Twitter and on Instagram and on Facebook. And you can also sign up for our newsletter at maysles.org to stay up to date with what we will be screening throughout this summer. So without further ado, I guess I'll just start with sort of an introductory question for all of you, which is that the sort of thematic thread between these two films is public transit. In the case of #1 Bus Chronicles, that being the #1 bus to New York, New Jersey, and in No Data Plan, there's an Amtrak line that you follow throughout the films. And for each of you, as you approached this film, my question is, what about your respective forms about public transit drew you to that space to either, like in some cases, to kind of put a perspective or to absorb the perspective of others? And I guess maybe we can start with Miko.
Sure. Yeah, well, I think, this film was a little bit of an accident. To be honest, I didn't expect to make a film about being on the train, but I had to go from LA to New York to go to BARD, where I was doing my MFA. And then my DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals status had expired. So I couldn't fly. I didn't have an ID. So I took the train, and then in taking the train, I thought that they'd have Wi-Fi on board, and then because my phone also didn't have a data plan, and then they didn't have Wi-Fi, so that I didn't really have anything to do for 3 days. So then I found myself filming most of the time, and it wasn't really like, okay, now I'm gonna make a film, but it was just like, oh, like, what do I do? Okay, I have this camera, and then I'm just mostly just like walking around the train and just kind of filming these observations of really like minute details of the train, not even knowing that if it would turn into a film is just kind of part of my diaristic practice. But as far as, I guess, maybe I forgot what you said, the lens or the perspective from which it's shooting from. Yeah, I mean, it's very entangled with being undocumented in the States in the form of travel, from which I'd go from LA to New York, especially during that time that my DACA was expired. And then so in many ways, I think about sort of these entanglements of this kind of camera movement or this fugitive type of cinema of going from LA to New York. I mean, it's fugitive in a sense that not like the movie The Fugitive or whatever, but like there's a sense of boredom and fugitivism also. And I think like I made this film because I was bored. And then that's like, I think that's a large aspect of being undocumented experiences, sort of being limited and having to wait and be bored. But yeah, that's why I made the film.
Same question to you, Joel.
Okay, well, for those of you who've seen the #1 Bus Chronicles, it's about a bus stop in Kearney, New Jersey. And Delmira and I both teach in New Jersey City University, which is in Jersey City, so it's about a mile from that bus stop. And, you know, I'm one of the more privileged people who gets to drive to work. I don't, well, I actually used to take public transportation from Brooklyn. It included a different bus line, but for quite a number of years, I'd be driving and I'd always drive by this one bus stop. It's, you know, in this very desolate location, and often there'd be quite a crowd of people waiting, you know, including like in the middle of the winter and harsh weather conditions and everything. And I just kind of got to wondering, who are these people? And I've always liked the idea of kind of, you know, microenvironment films, you know, or micro histories, like using one very specific place or story to talk about larger issues. And the student population we serve at NJCU, as it's abbreviated, is pretty similar demographically to the people who use the bus stop. It's a very working class university. It's almost entirely first generation college students. One of the main characters in the film actually is a former student of ours. So, you know, it was partly, you know, I mean, partly being a filmmaker, especially, you know, if you're working in nonfiction, there is a very, you know, sort of snoopy curiosity of like, just who are these people that you want to indulge. But it was like a population, you know, I'm white, I'm middle class. I don't, you know, try to say anything other than that. But I've been working with a population, a student population that's, you know, very much like the one portrayed in the film for many years. So it's a curiosity that's, you know, informed by that experience.
Lovely. And same question to you, Delmira.
Yeah, well, Joel and I are colleagues, and so it happened over a summer, and he told me about his idea, and it appealed to me because I, for a long time, was also a bus rider, and prior to this project, I worked on the short video where I would ride, and I actually live in Union City, New Jersey, and during the time when I made the project, I was also living here, and so the project that I made the video was about riding a jitney bus, which is mostly the riders on the bus are usually undocumented. And so it was more of an experimental film. So I have a background with public transportation and with a certain demographic, and being first generation, you know, immigrant parents, and so it appealed to me. And also, when we would go out and film interviews, I would ride the bus with my camera, Tascam, and try to do some man on the street recordings on the bus stops and the actual bus line. So I tried to remain somewhat authentic because I do have a car, but there was something about actually riding the bus. And actually, Joel and I got at that opportunity to ride the bus many times to just experience that and try to get you know, get to know people, and people would start to familiarize themselves with us because they would see us on a day-to-day or weekly basis when we would go out and film. So it was an interesting dynamic to be able to do that, and also get to know people and sort of make friends, and even if it's something like just a familiar hello. And so that's sort of how it evolved.
Yeah. I would also just take a moment. I forgot to mention for those audience members, there is a chat button at the bottom of your screen, and after I'll be accepting audience submitted questions in the second half of the Q&A. So feel free to add questions there, and they'll be selected and chosen later on. But next, this one is for Miko, which is that as you accumulated this footage during the train trip, and presumably, you know, as the story unfolds, you see that you are the sole camera operator. At what point did you decide having accumulated all this footage from the trip, that it was going to become a film? And what was that editing process like? And how did you decide to merge this story of your family with that footage?
Yeah, well, as I said, I wasn't sure that I was making a film throughout the trip, but I think it was a crucial moment, not just in the film, but also like in my life when Border Patrol boarded the train, and then I had this sort of close encounter with them, and then just I don't know, just kind of observing my natural reaction to that interaction is still to like bring the camera, to involve the camera and my sort of perspective of like holding the camera. It was really interesting for me to kind of see how like my film language had immediately shifted, or like all care for like aesthetics or framing had gone out the window. And then my hands were shaky because I was really like traumatized. And then I thought that there was kind of I hadn't decided to make a film there, but it was just super meaningful for me to sort of create that connection, that like this camera sort of, how the images look is a reflection of that moment. Or like and also with the previous moments in the film, but in that moment I had realized this connection between the body moving through the space and the cinematic image. Um, and then so when I got off the train and I don't know, was in Bard, I didn't touch the film for a little while. I was working on like a direct animation film just because I wanted to do some like finger painting on clear leader. And then but one day I just like looked at the footage. I was like, hey, this could be something. I'll just put them all in order since it's like west to east, and then start, I don't know, like see if there's something there. And then I just kind of chip away at it. Um, you know, like with this, how this story about my family, how it got folded into this, was that this was writing that I've had, and I think for a lot of my films I just kind of like pool material together, like they gravitate towards each other, whether it's the same project or not. And then so initially I just put that text there as a placeholder, like okay, like just put something there and then later you'll like record your real voiceover or something. But then I just let it sit there for longer and longer throughout the editing process, and it's almost like it just got ingrained into the film. And then I think it was like I don't know, like it's interesting to kind of like have this silent narration, because that's kind of how I experienced it on the train. Like I didn't tell anybody about my experiences on the train really, um, but it's going through my head like it's a internal monologue. Um, or that's how I justify it. Honestly, I left it there and I was like, okay, so this text is gonna stay there, and then one day I'm gonna do a voiceover. But then I also never got around to the voiceover. And then I was just like, oh yeah, I just kind of like these train sounds actually. Um, and I think I edited for I don't know, about like 5 to 7 weeks. I like to put really strict limitations on myself for making films, like a tight deadline. I don't know, just to, I wanted to keep this sense of momentum of the train, like to have that sort of like it's still moving inside of me, and I wanted to not over labor the film to make it, I don't know, in this, I wanted to keep the a sense of like a rough cut aspect to it. So one day it was just like, okay, it's done, like out of my hands.
I think you did a really beautiful job of um, using the film to both look out and then also incorporating images of yourself kind of around the train through like reflection or screens to kind of like pull that space of what your mind was doing during that time. And then obviously like, yeah, and then you have this sort of like reflective dialogue going throughout. That was
Thank you.
very, yeah, it had a very beautiful synthesis too.
No, as I was going throughout the journey, I was like, okay, I already did a window thing. Like, what else is here? Oh, it's my hand. Oh, it's my pants.
Yeah, it's all, there's a few shots where you're shooting the emergency exit, and it
Yeah.
can emergence, and I was kind of reading that almost as like chapter titles as the film moved through. So it was like emerge,
Oh, that's so
emergency.
good. I
Yeah,
never thought about that, but that's so cool.
yeah, I thought that was very beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. This question is, well, for Joel specifically, which is that, as I guess first the sort of perhaps classic question in a lot of different types of documentary, but which is that how did you, you selected kind of a handful of bus riders to follow and to kind of dive deeper into their stories and their lives, as well as, making beautiful and interesting portraits of people in passing in any briefer context. How did you choose the people, or how did the relationships develop with the people that you were going to profile more deeply? Actually, that could be for Delmira or Joel, I'm sorry.
Well, we can probably both speak to that. It was kind of like going fishing, which is sort of a funny analogy because one of the main characters turns out to be a fisherman. But, we would go out to this bus stop and just we spent like a lot of hours there sucking up diesel fumes and talk to people. And, Delmira's bilingual, which I'm not, so that helped a lot. A lot of the people there, immigrants, including I didn't know this when we started the film, but there's a jail around the corner from this bus stop, and I knew there was a jail, but I didn't know it was an ICE facility, Immigrations and Customs Enforcement. So that became a whole other thread. But some of the people, well, one of the main characters was a former student. Another one actually was a university student that I was introduced to through another professor friend. But some of the characters we met just by like standing out there and chatting people up, and a lot of people were willing to talk to us once. The follow-through rate was very, very poor. So we'd, often get into conversations, sometimes really interesting conversations, and people would share, like they'd give us their phone numbers, but lots and lots of them would never call back or respond. Like you try to follow up. So it was really sort of a casting a wide net and seeing what you get and seeing who's willing to follow through and respond and continue to participate. And there was some, we wanted some mix of male and female and like that, but it really was a lot, there was a certain kind of almost I Ching quality to it, of, just casting out and seeing what you get and following it. Do you want to add to that?
Yeah, no, I mean, it was, and I think part of why some of the people we interviewed were kind of shy to get involved any further with the project is because some of them were also undocumented, and they were probably concerned about their status or being on video, even though we would not film them, maybe just record their voices. There was still some it was hard to follow through with that, and I could understand why. So we did have some challenges with recruiting people for the Chronicles film.
And in general, it sounds like these films, the people, obviously, in Miko's case, it's autobiographical, and in Number One Bus Chronicles, it's more portraiture. But a big kind of synthesis of this is the stories that move through the spaces along with the people. And I was wondering if how you all felt about the difference in perception of either self-perception or kind of what other people may be experiencing as they're traveling, if you sense any difference in traveling in public transportation versus private transportation, whether it be a bus or a train or a car or even walking as a form of private transportation, and how, you know, people both interacting with the camera and your experience of filming with them or filming with yourself, how you felt they were participating in public transportation.
Mm-hmm.
If you felt like there's any difference in being in public and trying to film and like process those feelings and informations, I guess.
Yeah, I guess for me, my approach to, I kind of just look for light a lot of times, or kind of these formal compositional things that of framing, and I kind of just sit somewhere, or I just like, for my technique is to kind of just film, do long takes, and let what happen. So then a lot of times it would be like nothing happening in the frame, and then I don't know, people would come and sit down or something, or something outside of the train would affect the image, like a train passes by and then the light happens. So I kind of like to just sit back, or like observe something for a long time, and then kind of learn like a corner or a detail, and then see how it sort of unfolds. And for me, that's a very like, I don't know, like a private space for me to kind of reflect. Um, I did this train journey twice, but the second time is when I made the film. But the first time I did it, I was really nervous actually, like really like shy about filming, and then or just what people would think. One person was like, "Hey, why are you taking so many pictures? Like, are you taking them back to China or something?" And I was like, "Yeah, it gets pretty crazy up there." But I don't know. I mean, maybe like that's a really rude thing to say, but it also made me think like, oh, I look like a tourist. Like I can totally get away with making this experimental train film, like just by, I don't know, like there's this privilege of even just people's perception of me on the train with a camera. Um, so I think I like, maybe I played that a little bit. Um, I don't know. I think it might, I mean, like in the moment that Border Patrol boarded the train, I feel like I really played up being like a student or something. I was like, okay, like get my barred lanyard out. Like I'm doing this role.
And we had also some issues about, how do people see the camera and what potential threats does that pose to them? And then also I think another commonality between the films is, boredom is an element in our film as well, and that, people riding public transportation are kind of a captive audience, and they're waiting for a bus. And in this case, a bus that doesn't always very reliably come. So it had this almost like, waiting for Godot quality of just, this could be a 5-minute wait, or it could be an hour wait. And we were waiting there with them. So in some ways, even though, we had the camera and they didn't, I think after a while, some people we earned their respect for being, enduring that with them. And even when you're on a bus, in public transportation, you're still in this kind of, confined space that you don't have very much control over. And often you're bored, you're staring out the window. You're a lot of people bury themselves in their phones, but it's kind of this netherworld between trying to absorb yourself in your personal experience, but also being kind of, boundaried and aware of people around you. So there is something kind of unique about the way people comport themselves on public transportation. Probably more so since the pandemic, but this was, pre-pandemic that the film was made.
I have an audience question here for number one Bus Chronicles, which is there's a scene in number one Bus Chronicles that uses shoes to identify people who are waiting for the bus. And the question is, how did you come to the decision to make that scene?
Dee, do you want to take that?
Yeah, sure. Well, Joel and I actually, while we were there, we would learn so much about the people writing. And there is, as we mentioned, a jail. And so a lot of what we noticed is when the people that would come out of the jail would sometimes come out without shoes, although I didn't see that. I'm not sure if Joel did, but I didn't see people without shoes, but they didn't have their shoelaces. And we just found that curious. And I think, and then also you can kind of study somebody just by looking at their shoes. You can kind of tell a little bit about their character. But I guess that's sort of the direction. And if you want to add to that, Joel.
Well, yeah, they for people who've been incarcerated, they confiscate their shoelaces and their belts to prevent suicide. So, when you're standing at the bus stop, anybody standing there, no shoelaces, no belt, they've just come out of jail. So it became kind of like a marker. And also, there are a lot of warehouses there. It's very industrial location. So, the people's shoes kind of tell a story. I mean, you're not seeing like, $500, corporate kind of footwear there. You're seeing, dusty, worn out work boots, and it kind of, it sort of told a story. And also, because confidentiality was an issue with a lot of people we filmed, like some people wouldn't want us to film them at all. We would ask, like, can we just film your shoes? And some people would say, okay. So it wasn't really a conscious decision though in the filming process, but then in the editing, it's like, oh, there are a lot of shots of shoes we have here. What can we do with them?
Sure. Same idea of working with what it is that you have. So I guess kind of a final question, which is that since you all have spent this time thinking about and working with footage of public transportation, how has your experience either seeing buses pass by in the street or driving a car or riding on trains, or just how has your experience of travel changed at a personal level? Do you see it any differently now?
I had a huge change after this film. And so for as long as I was undocumented in the States, I couldn't leave, because once I would leave, I wouldn't be able to come back. But throughout this train journey, by the end of the line, I had decided that like it was also my end of the line, that I wanted to leave and start over. So yeah, I mean, there's this train, but then like a year later, or after the film came out, it's circulated around a lot of film festivals. And I'm always sad when I can't physically be there at the film festival, especially when there's an invitation to like Rotterdam or I don't know, Sheffield or whatever. It's like, oh, like I really want to be there. And so I wanted to travel with my films and just kind of also just be with the rest of the world outside of the States. So yeah, last August I moved back to the Philippines, and then it allowed me a new sense of agency as far as traveling, which I'd never experienced before in my life. And this sort of sense of confinement of being in the States undocumented and unable to leave had suddenly disappeared. And then Like I get to go to, I don't know, like Yamagata to the film festival, or like London for Open City, and right now I'm in Mexico City. So it's a completely different dynamic with travel. And I don't know, I mean, pre pre-pandemic, right now, like everyone's just chilling inside. But but yeah, I think it's a right now for me, I feel very lucky, and it feels very like freeing to be outside of the States, and kind of it's like a beautiful moment for me of like rediscovery.
Mhm.
I haven't traveled very much since the film was finished. So yeah, it hasn't really changed my relationship to public transportation too much. Although actually watching your film, Miko, it made me remember, it conjured a lot of memories of what it's like to be on a long trip on public transportation, especially on a train where there's a lot to see out the window. But the way it continues to echo for me working on the film is just, remembering what it's like to be doing, sort of low wage day labor. I have had periods in my life, many years ago when I did that, and it's so like everybody has that so immediately around them, people just doing service jobs, but it's so easy to forget what that experience is like. So, spending so much time, out at a bus stop and then in the edit room with those people, it's just like, it's always a reminder of, the other experiences.
I would say for myself, I don't know, I guess I've become a little bit friendlier. It's not like I wasn't friendly to begin with, but now I don't care. Like, I'll smile more at people, even if I am in a situation where I'm on a bus or on a plane. Of course, lately we're not really traveling anywhere because of the pandemic, but I think it just, I don't know, yeah, I'm not afraid to smile more at people, especially other writers, like let's say on a bus. And I feel like we're all on a journey. We're all going somewhere. We all have a story to tell. And
Beautiful. Lovely. Well, that's about all the time we have for today. But again, thank you all so much for joining us for this panel. And thank you all for showing your films with us. Again, if you haven't already, be sure to check out No Data Plan and #1 Bus Chronicles at the Virtual Cinema. They're streaming for another week. And have a great rest of your afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much.